All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our today's session. So it's another Saturday, another Power Platform Learner to Leader session. So it's pleasure to have each of you joining us from different parts of the world. This is Arash Aghajani. I'm a Microsoft MVP and community leader from Vancouver, Canada. Uh, Today we have our last session of October 2024. We have a special guest today, Natasza, and with a great topic, building resilient Power Automate flows for error handling and logging. So she is a Microsoft Power Platform architect from Advania, UK. And we are fortunate that we have Natasza at today's session, and we are going to learn a lot of things around the Power Automate flow, how we can handle the error and log the error during our flows in the Power Automate. So it's important things that we need to care when we are developing Power Automate flow in Power Platform. So let me jump to the next slide and a little bit introduce about our community, the Microsoft Learn community. The Microsoft Learn community offers various ways for learners to connect with peers and experts to enhance their expertise and achieve career goals. It includes the Microsoft Learn Hub for updates and discussion, and learning room for direct engagement on specific topics and technology. Access the community through this link, aka.ms/Microsoft Learn community, to engage with the Microsoft Learn community, and using the aka.ms/learning rooms to join to the several learning room that's introduced by Microsoft Learn community, and engage with the Learn experts in the Microsoft learning rooms. So Power Platform Learner to Leaders is one of the Microsoft Learn learning rooms, which has more than 2,000 members. We are sharing the latest information about Power Platform in our learning room, and also conduct this series of session every Saturday for Power Platform enthusiasts. So if you are not member of this community or learning room, please join us through this link, aka.ms/join PPLTL, Power Platform Learner to Leader. And the next slide here is our code of conduct and the rules that we follow in our learning, actually in our session every Saturday. Microsoft aims to empower everyone globally through knowledge sharing and events, ensuring a respectful and inclusive environment for all. Harassment or degrading behavior is not tolerated, and everyone is responsible for upholding these standards. The code of conduct encourages awareness, friendliness, respect, openness, understanding, and kindness. Before we begin, a few important notes here. The first one is, if you have any question during the presentation, feel free to type them in the chat box. We will have a dedicated Q&A session around 5 to 10 minutes towards at the end. And the last but not least, this session is being recorded for those who could not join us live, and will be available shortly in Power Platform Learner to Leader YouTube channel. So and the last slide here is about the AI Skills Challenge. Is currently run by Microsoft Learn. So it started September 24th, and it's continue until the November 1st. There are, I think, there is 4 days left until the end of this skills challenge. So if you have sometimes, you can register for this challenge and get and level up your skills around the AI topic, Azure AI, Copilot Studio, Copilot, and it was 6th challenge that's introduced by Microsoft Learn. So you can register for those challenge and get your badges and level up your skills at the end of this challenge. So before any delay, I'm going to hand it over to Natasza, and also invite Natasza to the session. and to the stage. So, hello.
Hi, Rash.
Hi, how are you doing?
Very good. How are
Good to
you?
see you. Good, good. Thank you so much.
No, thank you, and thank you for the introduction. And indeed, what you said about my session is completely true. You should never ignore Power Automate error handling in Power Automate, and always, always be conscious of it when developing
Yeah,
Power Automate flows. And I'll tell you why.
yeah.
So,
I agree totally. Can you please share your screen and slide?
absolutely.
Okay. Okay. There you go.
Amazing. So, as Arash said, my session is around building resilient Power Automate flows, and we will go through how do we handle errors within it and how do we log these errors as well so that we can deal with them efficiently. So, just a few words about me. I'm a Power Platform architect at Advania UK. We have a few offices in the UK, but I'm based in London. If you want to link up with me on LinkedIn, here is a nice QR code. You can just scan it and connect with me. So before we jump into the presentation, there are a few key terms that we should probably go through. So starting with probably one that everyone will be familiar with. So what's Power Automate? Power Automate is a cloud-based tool which allows you to create flows between apps and services, allows you to exchange data between these services and automate processes. Next, we've got the concept of a solution, and a solution is used in Power Platform to organize your flows, apps, and other components of the Power Platform into, let's call them folders. We will also be using the term child flow. So a child flow is a flow that's triggered from a parent flow. So it's a flow that's got an instant trigger and can be triggered from another flow. Then I did mention the word trigger. Trigger is the event that starts the flow. So it could be a scheduled trigger. So it could be, for example, running every day. It could be an instant trigger, so triggered manually, or it could be an automated trigger as well. So that could be caused by an action. For example, a file being uploaded into SharePoint. And then we've got actions. Actions are the steps that the flow takes after the trigger has triggered. Then we've got connectors. So connectors are those kind of tools that that help you connect to these other services. So for example, Outlook, SharePoint, Twitter, Salesforce, just as examples. So it really allows you to communicate with other platforms through Power Automate. Then we've got dynamic content. Dynamic content within Power Automate are essentially fields that are generated by other actions. So let's say that you had an action to send an email. An output of that will be your dynamic content that you can then use downstream in your flow, which is very, very useful. Next, we've got variables. Variables are a way to store some of your data, and you can then change that data within your flow. So during my presentation today, you will see how you can use these variables within the flow to capture the status of your flow. For example, has it failed? Has it succeeded? Etc. etc. Then we've got, lastly, environment variable. So it's very similar to your variable, but it's bigger. It's a global variable that can be used within different flows, apps, etc., etc., and it's held within your solution. So why should you be worried about errors? So there are multiple reasons for that, and I've put just a few of them on the slide. So first of all, it can definitely lead to delayed processes. So if your flow errors and it stops and doesn't run any further, and you will not notice that, you may see that your processes just will not run or will be delayed whenever a person picks up that the flow indeed has stopped running. It can also lead to lost data or transactions. So it can have quite a big impact on businesses. So it could, for example, cause a business to lose revenue just because a process has stopped running. It can also cause business inefficiencies and the need for people to manually go and do certain things. And lastly, decreased customer satisfaction. So for businesses, this is definitely something that people should be worried about, in addition to any financial impact that can happen as well. So this is just an example of an order processing flow. So I've put a few tiles together. Of course, this is not a full process. It's just an example of how a process could run at a company. So a trigger in this example is that an order is placed through a online portal. So then what the flow needs to do, the flow needs to validate order details, then generate a shipping label with some sort of third-party service such as DPD or UPS or whatever that may be. Then it would send an order to the warehouse. Then also the flow would notify the customer. And lastly, it would update procurement. So you will see that all of these steps are absolutely crucial in this flow. And if any of them fails, we could be in a lot of trouble. So let's say that the generate shipping label step has failed and the rest of the steps are cancelled. Nobody will know about this because we don't have error logging. It will not retry any actions because we don't have any retry policies. So let's look at how we could improve that. So you will see that almost each and every action here has a retry. Of course, we should always retry, but there should always be a fallback or an alternative method of doing something. So in the validate order details step, we've got a fallback to log the error. So if it doesn't go through after multiple retries and we are not able to validate these order details for whatever reason, we will need to capture that reason for as long as it's given in the flow and then log that error and potentially notify, for example, the IT support desk for them to deal with this immediately. With the generate shipping label steps, we could do some other things. We could, for example, notify the team to generate a label manually. And we could then continue with the flow once the shipping label has been generated manually. So there are a few things that you can do in addition to retries and logging errors. So I will now walk you through the techniques for error management. So we will talk about automatic retries, so about those built-in policies where we can configure the delay and how many times it should retry. Then we will talk about the scope action. So how can we use it for try and catch, and how can we group it together in a logical way. Then parallel branching. So how can we use that to run two actions in parallel to help with our flow's efficiency. Then do until. So for how long should we keep retrying? So for example, until a condition is met or a specific count is there. Then we've got run after. So run after is used to select which actions should run after a failure or, for example, a timeout. And terminate, of course, it's to terminate, so end the flow with a specific status. So going from the top, talking about retries first, there are few different types of retries. So we've got exponential interval, fixed interval, the default, and no retries whatsoever. So usually it will be your default within the flow, but I will show you how you can use the exponential and fixed and what's the difference between them as well. So you will see a screenshot on the right-hand side with where you can find the retry policy. So when you have your action and switch from parameters into settings, under networking, it will contain that retry policy where you can switch between those four different options. So first of all, we've got the exponential interval. So you can see that in our example, we essentially have 6 retries. So we have set the count to 6, and then we've set the interval to 2. And because it's exponential, it will increase every time that it retries. So you will see that the first retry will be 2. Then the second retry will be 4, and it will double each and every time. So it exponentially grows. And you can see that the interval needs to be in the ISO format that I will also be covering in a second. So the fixed one, much simpler. It's just fixed on every retry. It will essentially delay it by the same interval. And as I mentioned, the ISO format. So you need to always start your, let's call it formula, with a letter P. That's for period. Then you will have years, months, and dates, and you will of course, require the letters. So Y for year, M for month, D for day. And then after that, you will have the time. So starting with T, and you cover hours, minutes, and seconds. And a note here, sometimes you may want, for example, only minutes and seconds. So you don't have to include all of the years, months, and days. Next on the list is scope. So the scope action in Power Automate can be used, as I said, to group actions together. And it's very, very useful if you're building quite big flows, because not only it allows you to then troubleshoot more easily and know what happened, but what's really good about it is if you have several actions that form a bigger kind of outcome, and all of these actions have to be done together, then it's a great idea to put it in a scope, because if any action in a scope fails, the whole scope will fail. So it's a really good indication for you to retry the whole scope, for example. Scopes can be used for try-catch. So try-catch is a method of you try an action. If that doesn't happen, then you can do something else. So in this example, we are trying an action that can be whatever. For example, we are checking order details, but that has failed. So you can see here that we've got those arrows that essentially tell us that the catch will happen if the previous action hasn't succeeded. So within our catch, we've got a few different actions. So we would post the error message, for example, in Teams. We would log it in ServiceNow, and we would also use the terminate action that I'll tell you in a bit about to actually indicate that the whole flow has failed. So you could also use that for try, catch, and finally, but that's slightly more advanced, and we will not be covering it today. But this is just to show you how you can use the scopes to help you with error handling. Next one are parallel branches. So on this screenshot, you can see that we've got two actions that essentially run in parallel. But the first one here runs only if the action before has succeeded. But the one on the right-hand side runs if the action before has failed. So we can kind of do it in an easier way than doing it action under an action. It's just easier for you to read as well. So in this very example, we have very simple actions. So the one that will run after the success, it will be just setting a variable status to success. And if it's failed, we set the variable of status to fail. So what you could also do is, for example, if you're generating a label to send a product to a customer, you could try with UPS and you could try with DPD and kind of see which one succeeds and potentially merge both results downstream. That's just an example, but yeah, you can just run the same action in parallel and, for example, stop running the parallel when one of them succeeds, and that way you don't have to wait for something longer than you need to. Then we've got do until. Do until is quite a simple concept. So this is do something within the loop until something happens. So first you need to set the condition. For example, a condition could be run until order equals received. So this could very easily this could be really useful, for example, if you know that your database is not updated immediately and that you potentially have to check a few times until the order comes through. So there are a few limitations to this. So the maximum number of times that you can retry is 5,000, and the timeout is 1 month. But of course, that doesn't hurt us too much because flows will never run longer than a month anyway. So the do untils, this is just an example of how it looks in the classic designer, and then in the modern designer. We are doing a very, very simple thing here. So we are initializing a number variable, setting it to 0, and you will see that our condition is that we want to run this loop until the number equals 50. So the action within it actually increments that variable by 5. So it checks 5 plus 5, it's 10. Is it 50? No, it's not 50. So it will continue trying until it's 50, and then it will end the flow. And this is how it looks in the modern designer. yeah, I am not asking anyone what's your preference here, but yeah, I still can't get used to the new one. The do until can be used, of course, for slightly more complex conditions as well. So that one with a number, very, very basic. But you could, for example, do an action until you receive a success message from your API response. Or you could, as I said, check if the record already exists in the database, or check has the file already been uploaded. And you could, for example, keep resending notifications to a person to upload a file until that's done. Or you could also do something until a payment is confirmed. And that could be, for example, notifying the customer to pay for their order. Run after, very, very useful action as well. So it allows you to specify which action you want to run after it has failed, timed out, or if it's skipped. So you can see here that you've got multiple different actions that you can take. So on the left-hand side, I've got an error handler scope, and I've set this scope as a whole to run if any action before that has timed out, is skipped, or has failed. And that essentially allows me to always handle that error if something went wrong in the flow. And again, comparison of modern versus the older designer. Terminate. So terminate allows you to set the status of your flow to whatever you want to set it to. So again, you could have different branches and do different things depending on whether it has failed, been cancelled, or succeeded. And you don't have to necessarily set it, i.e. hard code it to these values. So you could, for example, use the variables that you've used within your flow and change the variable according to what happened. And only then, as a last step, you could have your terminate, where the status is actually set to your variable. So that really makes life easier. In terms of logging and alerting, you can imagine there are endless ways to do that. So you could either go the very classic way, so logging errors in a structured, in a database or in a SharePoint list, in an Excel file, whatever that may be, that works for you and this scenario. So of course, if you're running very large scale automations, that should definitely be logged in, for example, SQL or Dataverse, something more advanced than, for example, an Excel spreadsheet. What's also coming soon is managing Cloudflow history in Dataverse, which is currently in preview, which may be very, very useful to handling these errors kind of out of the box. And on the left-hand side, you can see how we are using respond to a Power App or flow. So this is essentially responding to, for example, a parent flow with the status of the flow, with the SharePoint list item URL, and the help text. And what I mean by help text is what exactly went wrong. So for example, if a user has triggered this flow from a Power App, they could essentially receive that banner at the top saying your flow has failed, and then the help text would show due to something, something, and something. So it's definitely a great way to also show the user that something has went wrong, and maybe they need to retry the action that they've tried within the app. And below are just some of the examples of what elements you could capture. So just some of the basic ones are obviously timestamp, the flow name or flow ID, also very, very useful, potentially where it's stored. So maybe the environment ID, if you have a lot of flows, that will definitely help you narrow it down. Then user ID, if it's relevant for the scenario, the ID of the user who has triggered the flow, then the error code and the error message. And the error message, as I mentioned, it is definitely advisable to use variables for these things throughout the flow, especially if you foresee that there may be multiple places where it can go wrong. In terms of alerting, again, multiple different ways. Depends on what systems your business is using. So it could be anything as simple as just an email, but an advice here is to avoid notification fatigue. Same with Teams, because the more of these kind of emails you send, the more they will be ignored. So a good idea here may be to also use different actions depending on how critical your error is. So maybe there is a variable you could set within your flow for flow error criticality. And then depending on that criticality, for example, send a text notification if it's very critical and urgent and is stopping some business critical actions. And you can also use things like push notifications, and of course, logging it in the service desk if it's something that's supported by your internal IT. And some extra tips. So you can build standard error logging, let's call it, and use it as a child flow. So as I showed you in an example before, is you could hold that help text and the status of the flow in a variable, and then send it back to your child flow, which is actually handling that error. So if you could give it the ID of the flow, for example, the ID of the environment, etc., it will do the rest. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to build in error handling into each and every of your flows. You could literally just have one child flow that you use in all of your main flows. As I mentioned, always capture these error messages, because it will save your life when you try to troubleshoot. And you can also add email addresses for example, IT support as environment variables. So these larger global variables that you can then use within different apps and flows. And the reason is, if you are developing a flow, an error handling flow that's sending emails, you wouldn't necessarily want to develop it and send the emails straight away to the IT support desk, because they may think that this is an actual ticket when it's not. You are only developing. So what's advisable here, of course, use dev test prod, and in dev potentially set it to your email or a testing email, etc., and only change it in production. So next one is around send error notifications as a variable. So very similarly to the above, you don't necessarily want to be sending emails when you're developing or testing. So what you could have is just a variable that's a yes, no, where you only set the send error notifications global variable to yes when you're in production. And of course, keep your flows well organized, and always name your actions, because you may think that you don't necessarily need it because your flow is small. It will grow and you will get lost. So yes, do name them. Definitely name them. So bringing it all together, we talked about automatic retries. We talked about the scope actions, parallel branching, the do until, run after, and terminate. And one advice, do use the terminate in all your flows. Even if you are developing, that can save you having to delete your actions. You can just move your terminate up a few steps, and it will help you build things. So yeah, thank you very much for listening, and thank you for joining in on a Saturday. That's amazing, and have a great day.
Thank you so much. Hi, Steve. Steve joined to our call and say hello. So yeah, thank you, Natasza, for this great tips and tricks on how we can and also error handling the error in the Power Automate. It was things there. So I saw that you mentioned that there is a Dataverse. We can also manage the Power Automate cloud flows through the Dataverse table, something like this. It was in preview, right? So
Yes.
can you explain a little bit about this?
Yeah,
I think there
absolutely.
is a table, right, in the Dataverse that we can get the history of the flow in the Power Automate, right?
Exactly that. So, currently in Power Automate, you can actually see which of your runs have failed or succeeded only after you go into your flow. But
Right.
now that data will be held in Dataverse. So I did see in a few of my environments that
Mm-hmm.
actually some of the runs got logged, but it was only some. And I know that it is in preview, so I'm sure that, it will keep on improving. But yeah, it's definitely great that it will actually be by default in your Dataverse table without you having to have a Dataverse action after your flow to
Mm-hmm.
create a row. So yeah,
Yeah,
exciting.
also it's useful that we can use the the data in this table in the Dataverse in the Power Apps when we run a flow through in the Power App, so we can get the information from this history and show
Yeah,
the
yeah,
user, for example, the error, issue, timestamp, something like that, right?
definitely.
Yeah,
Definitely, yeah. Yeah, yeah.
yeah. Okay, awesome. So everyone, if you have any question, please put in the comment box. So it was a short session today, but with a lot of tips and tricks. So uh, I think it was very useful for everyone that would like, and also it's contains some best practices. So because I'm using several of things that you mentioned here today in my project for a
Mm,
client, also the try and cache, because it's important that you be able, to handle the error in the Power Automate and send the proper information to the end user also in the Power Automate flow or in the Power Apps as well.
absolutely. Yeah, fully agree. Yeah, I
Yeah,
think as much as building Power Automate flows is super, super easy and you can get it
yeah,
to do the thing that you wanted to do quite quickly,
yeah,
it's very easy to forget that the error
yeah,
handling is absolutely
yeah,
crucial.
because sometimes you encounter with some error, some roadblock in the flow, and you cannot you don't know what's exactly happened in the behind the scene, so the error handling and the logging as well will help the developer, the citizen developer, not the end user, the power user, I think, that's
Mm,
to identify and recognize the issue, and to try to fix this also for the large scale flow that we are developing in the Power Automate.
yeah, fully agree.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm not seeing any question here. And thank you for joining us today, Natasza, and hopefully to see you again in the future event with another session. I know that you are so busy with your stuff and and also in the new role you got and promoted in the Advania. So what we will be happy to have you again in the future
Absolutely.
session. Thank you everyone for joining us today, and see you in next Saturday with our actually new session that will line up for the November with another great speakers. Thank you so much. Have a great weekend and see you soon. Bye.
Have a great weekend. Bye.
Bye.